Welcome to the newscast. I'm Daniel Choy here with the latest at this hour. Top nuclear envoys from the United States and China will meet for talks in New York on Monday. This follows a string of diplomatic maneuvers in recent days between key members of six-nation talks aimed at denuclearizing North Korea. Our Hwang Sung-hee starts us off.
China's chief nuclear envoy, Wu Dawei, will meet his U.S. counterpart, Glyn Davies, in New York Monday as they seek to jumpstart the long-stalled six-party nuclear talks. During the meeting, the United States is expected to urge China to pressure North Korea to not conduct a fourth nuclear test. The two are also expected to discuss ways to bring back the isolated nation back to the negotiating table. Wu is expected to debrief Davies on the results of his visit to Pyongyang last month, stepping up his efforts to resume the six-party talks. The multilateral denuclearization dialogue involving the two Koreas, the U.S., China, Japan, and Russia, has been stalled since late 2008. But with Seoul, Washington, Beijing, and Tokyo engaging in a flurry of diplomatic activity last week, anticipation about a possible resumption of the talks is growing. Ahead of his trip to Washington, the Chinese diplomat met with South Korean chief nuclear negotiator Hwang Sung-hee in Beijing.
In reflecting on the current state of affairs on the Korean peninsula, South Korea and China have agreed to strengthen our strategic cooperation.
The U.S. State Department said Saturday local time that the ball is in North Korea's court, adding the North must take the necessary steps to return to dialogue. Some experts say the current confrontational state may come to an end once Seoul and Washington wrap up their annual joint military drills on April 18th. But others warn of another round of provocations by Pyongyang ahead of U.S. President Barack Obama's visit to Seoul and Tokyo at the end of this month. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
President Park is stressing the need for stronger national efforts towards reunification, which he says will allow Koreans on both sides of the border to enjoy greater freedom and prosperity. Through a statement on Sunday, President Park said she believes that with reunification, the Korean people who have overcome various crises and challenges will be able to take another historic leap forward. In related news, Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol said South Korea's central bank will begin preparations for reunification. At a meeting of the group of 20 finance ministers and central bankers in Washington, Lee said the Bank of Korea will set up a new department in charge of researching related issues, such as economic and currency integration upon reunification. Seoul's foreign ministry says Korea and Japan will meet for working-level talks in Seoul Wednesday in an effort to resolve the issue of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. The meeting is the result of an agreement reached by the two sides ahead of a trilateral summit in The Hague between Korea, Japan, and the United States last month. At the upcoming talks, Korea is expected to reiterate its demand for an official apology and compensation from the Japanese government for the so-called comfort women. Japan has been claiming that the issue was resolved through a 1965 treaty when the two countries normalized diplomatic ties. Around 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were forced to serve the Japanese army in comfort stations in the early 20th century. Diplomatic tensions between China and Japan are on the rise after 3 Chinese ships entered waters surrounding a disputed island chain in the East China Sea controlled by Japan and claimed by China, known as the Senkaku in Japan and Diaoyu in China. China's state-run Xinhua news agency said Sunday Chinese Coast Guard vessels sailed through the waters near the islands at 9 a.m. the day before. A Japanese patrol boat demanded that the Chinese ships leave immediately. One of the vessels declared that the Diaoyu Islands are historically Chinese territory and the surrounding waters belong to China. There was no physical confrontation between the two sides. Moving on to other parts of our world, the unrest in Ukraine. It is escalating in the eastern part of the country, and there are now reports of casualties after Ukrainian security forces launched an operation to stop armed pro-Russian protesters from taking control of government buildings. For more, here's our Kwon So-ah.
The crisis in Ukraine has entered a dangerous new phase as pro-Russian demonstrators and Ukrainian security forces clashed on Sunday in the eastern city of Slavyansk. Ukrainian forces launched what they called an anti-terrorist operation to clear pro-Russian separatists from the police headquarters that protesters had seized the day before. One Ukrainian state security officer was killed, and at least 5 other government officials were injured. Reports say there were also casualties on the pro-Russian side. An act of aggression by Russia is what Ukraine calls the recent raids by pro-Russian activists in eastern Ukraine.
We want to unite with Russia. We will be thankful to Russia if they help us, but we'll stay until victory. Honestly, I'm not afraid to die for freedom.
Kiev has mobilized its troops to take action as Russian forces took control of more areas in the eastern part of the country, including in the city of Kramatorsk on Saturday and Slavyansk. During a phone call between U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Saturday, Kerry expressed his concerns about armed attacks in eastern Ukraine and warned of additional consequences if the situation does not de-escalate. On Sunday, Lavrov told Ukrainian authorities that any military action by Ukraine could undermine upcoming talks on the crisis. Ukraine, Russia, the US, and the EU are scheduled to enter talks on the crisis in Geneva on Thursday. In related news, the White House announced that Vice President Joe Biden will make a trip to Kiev on April 22nd to show US support for Ukraine's new government. He will be the most senior U.S. official to travel to the country since the crisis erupted. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
6 hours is all it took for a horrific wildfire to devour the Chilean port city of Valparaiso, taking lives and engulfing homes. On Sunday, Chile's National Emergency Office reported the flames had swept through 150,000 square meters of land, killing around 4 and destroying more than 500 homes. At least 3,000 residents have been evacuated. The city, which lies 110 kilometers northwest of the capital, Santiago, has been declared a disaster zone with reports of blackouts and drinking water disruptions. Chilean President Michelle Bachelet has also declared a state of emergency, which clears the way for the armed forces to get involved. More than 500 firefighters from 7 provinces, some in helicopters, are battling the fire, but high winds have hampered their efforts to create fire breaks. Moving on, Korea's Finance Minister Chun Oh-seok says Korea is no longer just a member of the G20, it is being accepted as a key player. Chun, who is attending the IMF and World Bank's annual spring meetings in Washington, said G20 members rallied behind Korea in expressing their determination to take realistic and concrete measures to shore up growth amid ongoing geopolitical risks and uncertainties. Korea also earned the approval of G20 members by presenting a plan for reforming the IMF. The move was welcomed by G20 finance ministers and bank governors who have expressed their disappointment with the United States for failing to ratify a major IMF reform package 4 years after it was proposed, and they have urged the U.S. to implement the reforms. People living in Korea may soon have to memorize a slightly longer PIN number to keep their financial accounts safe. Financial authorities are moving forward with plans to lengthen personal identification numbers from 4 digits to 6. The new rule could be implemented as early as this year, starting with credit card and bank accounts. The Financial Services Commission and the Financial Supervisory Service say this is a security upgrade that's needed to prevent hacking, and that countries in Europe are already using 6-digit codes. The plan to change the PIN length in Korea was actually prompted by a recent wave of massive data leaks that hit the nation starting late last year. Chances are your life has been touched by the devastating effects of cancer in one way or another. To better treat and diagnose the disease, Korean scientists have developed a new substance that finds cancer cells and destroys them. Our Paul Yi has more.
Cancer cells, which multiply indefinitely, are made up of not just one cell, but many. Due to this multiplication property, they are acidic in contrast to normal cells. While a normal cell has a neutral pH reading of 7.4, the pH reading of a cancer cell comes to 5.5. The nanosubstance treatment is based on these fundamentals. After combining nanoparticles with substances that sense acidity, large quantities put together create so-called nanogrenades. These nanogrenades travel through the blood vessels, and when they come across a cancer cell, they enter and explode. Inside are diagnostic substances and treatments that can destroy cancer cells when light is shown on them.
The holes of the carcinomatous tissues are bigger than normal tissues, so the nanosubstance can enter easily. The surface changes to positive from negative, therefore it spreads better through the carcinomatous tissues.
Because the nanogrenade is not an antigen-antibody reaction, but reacts to acidity, the method can be applied to all types of cancer cells.
Due to various forms of antigen antibodies, there are limitations in treatment. However, because this substance reacts to acidity, it can be used to treat various tumors.
In fact, animal tests have shown that the substance was effective in destroying at least 90% of various different tumor cells.
Normally, nanoparticles aren't very effective in treating various tumor cells, but this model turned out to be very effective.
The researchers say if the substance is commercialized, it can first be used to treat cancers where light is easily transmittable, such as skin or oral cancer. The findings have been published in the Journal of the American Chemical Society. Paul Yi, ARIRANG News.
Well, here in Korea, it looks like the daytime highs will keep the mercury level at above 20 for the foreseeable 3 or 4 days. And it's time for us to check out the weather conditions in your neck of the woods and around the world. And that's all we have for you at this hour. I'm Daniel Choy. Have a great start to your week.